Alrighty. So we've already kind of gone through, again, my name is Jen Barnhill. I'm going to be the host of this conversation. And today we're being joined by Beth Conlon, who I said before off for the recording is a expert on the SOFA. She's been tracking this for years, has a personal connection to the Status of Forces Agreement, and is going to help facilitate our conversation. With that said, I'm going to kick it over to you, Beth. Feel free to share a little bit about what your story, and then some updates that we have for the European SOFAs.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. Feel free to, as we chat today, to answer any questions. Jen's going to pop some polls up while we're talking, but if you have something you want to talk about outside of that, or you have something that relates to what we're talking about, don't be shy here. Last night, we learned a ton just from people sort of sharing their point of view. And so it's always helpful to understand kind of all sides of this. So as Jen mentioned, my name is Beth Conlon. I'm an active duty Army spouse. And 10 years ago, I was personally victimized by the Status of Forces Agreement in Germany. I was working for a global employer. We got orders to Germany. My employer was like, no problem, I'll transfer you to our Munich office. And then the question was asked, oh, but if you're going under SOFA status, how is your work visa going to affect that? So if my employer sponsors you, what does that do to your SOFA status? And then therefore, what does it do to your service member? Does it maybe take me off of their orders? Does it make it look like he's unaccompanied? Like what happened? Like what happens in that process? And nobody could answer that question. No one. So even though I had a willing employer willing to support me, nobody within DOD, the State Department, or attorneys could answer the question, would this impact my SOFA status and therefore my service member? And ultimately, I was just told, you just can't work. The SOFA says you can't work. And so I spent the last 10 years asking, show me in the SOFA where it says I can't work. Because that one move derailed my career for 5 years. It put my family in the situation to have some really hard conversations about, do we stay in this marriage or do we leave the Army? Because I could not be in the position to be a trailing spouse and just like a stay-at-home wife. That is not what the dream I have for myself. And if an overseas move was going to disrupt my career like that, I felt that to just be an absolutely unacceptable answer, and also not fair for the other military families coming behind us. We don't need to be putting our families in this situation to choose financial security or service. You can have both, and you should be able to have both. So after 3 years in Germany and calling senators, congressmen, talking to every JAG officer I could find, calling the State Department, calling the White House, I got nowhere. And then I PCS directly to Korea. So I did 5 years overseas. And I continued sort of digging into this, asking questions, forcing people to answer me. Still kind of got nowhere. And then after coming back from 5 years overseas, I started working with Blue Star Families, and my role there was Director of Workforce Development. So I ran their military spouse employment program. And that's when I started to get kind of a little bit of traction. I was able to get in front of the right people in the administration, on the Hill, in DOD, and continue to poke the bear and say, you know, we deserve the clarity around how SOFA does or does not impact employment. And since then, it's been a long 10 years, but we've had some really exciting updates this summer in particular, and I'll share all the links for this group. We had an executive order by the president signed in June. One little part of that was to clarify Status of Forces Agreement. We had a monstrous update to the Status of Forces Agreement in Italy that I will share with everyone. And then we also had the American Bar Association, which was the personal project of mine. I worked with the Bar Association for the last year to get a Status of Forces resolution passed by the Bar Association, which it passed in August and has been accepted. And basically what that means is sort of like, you know, how like 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Crest. It's sort of like that. It's like the Bar Association says that Status of Forces Agreement needs clarity for employers and spouses. So it's a really powerful tool rather than, you know, Beth Conlon, the angry Army spouse, just bitching about SOFA. I can now say the White House has an executive order and the Bar Association agrees, right? So that puts a lot of weight behind trying to move this needle forward. So all of that to say, I can get super nerdy on SOFA, like real nerdy into corporate tax and all that good stuff. So I'm happy to share any best practices or updates around maintaining corporate employment while you're overseas, starting your own business, working for a small company, or what have you. But really, we want to kind of hear your experiences and what questions you have on this issue.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. So, obviously I just launched a poll to see where everyone is living, and it sounds like we have, a mixture here. Some people are headed overseas or thinking of going overseas. Some haven't. But does anyone want to ask any questions or share anything based on what Beth said? I want to give everyone the opportunity to share if they have. I saw you came off mute. If you wanted to share or not. Sorry.
Yes, mostly I just want to express my gratitude for all the hard work to get some of the big changes that have happened recently. As an attorney, I already face a lot of barring issues just state to state, just when we're not going overseas. So we are headed to Italy next. And so I've directly benefited from the work of you, Jennifer, and you, Beth. And so I just want to express my thanks for that.
And you've seen the latest Italy updates, they specifically mention practicing law. Okay, good.
Thank the good Lord.
Yeah.
I do feel like a lot of the times, and I understand why, it's a very state-specific regulated industry, but, whenever there is a movement forward just nationally for Army, military spouses or attorneys, there's always seems to be like a caveat, like everybody, you can do this new licensing thing, but not you, attorneys. So I'm grateful that these new provisions took us into account.
Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about your experience. And so one of the questions that I just asked, obviously, was, were you able to successfully, be employed while you're going overseas, or either you have lived or will live? So is anyone willing to share about their experience, whether they either had employment as they approached a PCS move to go OCONUS, or did you look to find employment while you were there? Is there anyone who would be kind of willing to share their starting experience? Like, what did that look like for you? Or what does that look like for you as you approach a move? What are your thoughts? What are you considering? What are the concerns or questions that you have as you start that process? If anyone would be willing to share.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in. So we live in England and have lived here a year now. And as a military, or as an Army family, most specifically. And so when I moved over here, a lot of concerns about will I be able to be employed, et cetera. And not saying is the correct answer, but I continue to keep my Texas residence with my previous employer and file just as if I was living in Texas, right? With no open acknowledgement that I was over here. The employer knew, but they didn't want to cross all these, right? Figure out how to do it correctly. I was laid off from that position in May, and then, started looking again and going through the process. As we all know, it's very, it's difficult. And so I had come to peace of like, hey, I'm just not going to have a job the rest of the time we're here. I also am part-time in grad school. So I was like, I'll just focus on that. Similar to what you had said, Beth, right? Like, that's not in my nature. I'm someone who wants to work, have my own career. I'm a veteran previously too. So like I have that drive. And so I wanted to figure out a way to work. In July, I was hired on by Raytheon, again, with the idea that, oh, it's a global company. It will be easy to move you over into the Raytheon UK legal entity and allow you to work under that premise for the rest of the time, which should be about a year that you're there. Once I got on, they were like, oh, actually, we didn't do our full vetting of that process. It was fine on the immigration side, but not on the tax side. Anyways, they kind of had fallen back on their whole word of it. So still in the process of trying to move over to the UK legal entity. Hopefully within the next month or two, I will be moved over and work in, of course, in that realm. But as we're familiar with different countries, it does mean I'll make about $1,000 less a month because of the tax rate being much higher here in England, paying into the pension system, right? So having to undo that future years when I'm of age and can pull that money out. So yeah, it is still while I'm thankful, hopefully to be able to move to the UK legal entity, I'll still face, some hardship or some differences as if I could, work elsewhere. So, yeah. And I did, through that process, tried to reach out through JAG offices here in England and the States with no, oh, we can't help you. We can't support that. You have to hire your own tax attorney based in, the UK who can help give you any guidance on that. So,
Tara, you literally touched on both sides of the coin of this, and I just want to give a little color to that. So initially you were saying the company you worked for, you kept your Texas residence. So I want to explain how that works. So if you work for a US-based company that does not have a presence outside of the US, a lot of those companies use the Military Spouse Residency Relief Act as how they adjudicate taxes and payroll. So for example, you're a Texas resident. Let's just pretend you're in the States, right? So you're a Texas resident and you were living in Georgia. Your employer would pay you and tax you as if you were living in Texas, even though you're living in Georgia, right? So a lot of employers just use that same logic and say, well, you're a Texas resident. That's what I'm going to use, even though you're living in London. That has been examined by several law firms, and there are employers that feel comfortable saying, yeah, this is fine. I will say though, that there is a risk there that some employers are just not willing to take, and that's the cost of doing business. Now, on the global employer front, so if you work for a global employer, I work for Amazon. If there is a legal entity in your host country, so in the UK, by law, you have to be associated with that entity and therefore paid in local currency and taxed locally. Now, having said all of that, we have a tax reciprocity policy in place with basically every country that's covered by SOFA, ironically, that if you will not live there for 5 years, so if you're there for 4.5 years or less, once you leave, you can file to reclaim all of those pension and social security taxes you were just talking about, Tara, because our partners overseas, their most income taxes are around 40%, so it's way higher. So you will most likely take a massive pay cut, even if you were to stay in your same job at your same level than you would in the US. So it is worth it to, when you leave, file to get that money back, because it is a big chunk of change. You can't get your income taxes back, but you can get that pension, social security taxes back. And then the last thing I'll say is that JAG officers cannot provide employment law support. They are not employment law attorneys. They can provide tax support. That is part of their job. So when you are talking to JAG, you need to talk about the tax implications, not whether or not you can work. Those are two very different conversations.
Just use tax implications specifically, and that should be within their scope of,
Correct. Now, you would think you're an attorney. You're smart enough to know when I'm talking to you about employment, what I really mean is taxes. But no, the number of brick walls I hit using the word employment and not taxes is silly. Which is why the American Bar Association adopting that resolution is even more important, because the Bar Association now has an opinion on this. Therefore, our JAG should too, right? So talk to JAG about taxes, not employment, and that should help you.
And
yeah, thanks for that.
Just so everyone knows, part of the reason for doing this in this format, of course, is to me personally inform the articles that I write, but also to help create a resource. So I will be sharing a lot of what Beth is sharing in on a website that will be in one centralized location. So I'll send that out to everyone after this call is over. Does anyone have any differing experiences that they would like to share? Part of what I would like to do is kind of talk about where things are different. We know all of our experiences are very varied. We're going to different places. We have different professional backgrounds. And so does anyone have anything slightly different, a different experience from Tara? And if no, that's okay too.
So I didn't go overseas, but got real close to it. So I was already mentally kind of doing this dance. Beth, I think I talked to you about this at the thing in Dallas. That week we got the all clear, he's actually not going overseas, and Italy, all the things happening at once. It was wild. So we were looking at potentially an overseas PCS, and I was doing the time zone buddy, trying to figure out if I can keep my remote job. So the thing that I was most concerned about wasn't finding a job once I got there. It was keeping what I have. I work remotely. Our team is fully distributed. My CEO, boss, is actually in New Zealand. So they're not unfamiliar with navigating, these sorts of things. And then the other partner in the business is a veteran. So they were like, we will figure it out. Not a big deal. you worry about the time zones. Like you decide if you can do the handle all that. But before I went to them, I was like, well, let me give you guys all of the information that I can, because the veteran boss, clearly he was cool. The civilian boss in New Zealand, it felt like more of a hurdle for me to approach him and say, hey, I know you like me. I know you've kept me for this long. Do you really like me? And do you really want to keep me? So I did want to flag a resource that was, I think, well-intentioned, but kind of fell flat just because of the vagaries of the laws in general. But IVMF had a white paper that you could, as a military spouse, hand to your employer, essentially. Like, here's kind of a primer on what you're potentially agreeing to and some of the things that you need to be asking questions about with legal, et cetera. However, like I said, I mean, there were great thought exercises, but we're like, well, we only know this country specifically, and in this one it's different, and here's why, and whatever. So I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where there's like uniformity in like the agreements, but definitely having some sort of baseline of understanding, particularly when it comes to remote employees of US based companies, would be super helpful. And I think that's just a matter of the times, charging ahead more quickly than these bureaucracies can tackle. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add to that. It was, it's stressful, all the things. And I was like, well, what if we just don't tell them? And I know of a lot of smaller, because we're a small company, we have 10 employees. So we didn't really have the big hurdles some of the larger organizations have. And we could just be like, you know what, just don't say anything. Like, use your home address and it'll be fine. But then I'm always curious, like, what the ramifications are on the backside of that. So those are my thoughts. Thank y'all.
Really. I, did launch that poll question, which is kind of related to what you're talking about. How easy is it to access information about the SOFA, and how confident are you in that information? And so obviously this group had a pretty strong experience with not being able to access the SOFA easily. It's interesting because when contrasted with last night's poll, there was a mix. Like, some people did find it a little easier if they were based in Japan to access this type of information. And I know, Beth, you had shared information about how varying these agreements are, and kind of how they apply to people as individuals versus just this like document that's a piece of paper that we, how it works. Did you have anything to add to the barriers when it comes to the SOFA and getting this information and clarity? I know you addressed the legal side of where they can go, but is there anything on the SOFAs themselves? Like, why is this so complicated to access for folks?
Yeah. So again, I can get real nerdy on this, so I'll try and keep it digestible. So the complications with the SOFA are for a various number of reasons, but to start, status of forces agreements are owned by the State Department. They're implemented, for lack of a better word, by DoD, and they're ratified by the Senate, and they have to be agreed upon between two countries. So it's a tri-agency, dual country agreement. So that in and of itself makes them incredibly complicated. And then from there are 122 individual status of forces agreements globally. They are established with a nation anytime there's a presence of service member there, and their original intent is for legal protection of our service members, right? So some of them include very specific things, like, for example, in Germany, the status of forces agreement, and in South Korea, actually, and in Japan, they have very specific call outs for your vehicle emissions. You have to, like, your vehicles are only allowed to like have this type of emission. And if you fail it, like in Germany, if your car is more pollutant than the others, you get a pass under status of forces agreement. So when you hear people say, like, well, we can't open up the SOFA for negotiation on employment because we'd have to renegotiate everything, that's just absolutely not true. We amend SOFAs all the time. We amended them for vehicle emissions. We just haven't amended them to clarify spouse employment. The other part of it is, if you were to Google status of forces agreement in Spain, right? You can go to the State Department, and under their peacetime treaties tab, you can find some. But you really honestly cannot find them all. And if you were to find them, they are a giant word salad about, like, they're a word salad that are not meaningful to any employer, because they are literally a peacetime agreement between two countries, right? So there's that part of it. But what I will say about the clarity of it, what just happened in Italy, and if you all might be familiar with this, Italy was like the worst offender. Like they were the country that like fear-mongered the most. They would, during your in brief, when you get there, they would tell spouses that if you are caught working anywhere other than on the installation, that they're going to revoke your SOFA status and take your DOD ID card, which, let me just clear that up real quick. Access to installation is a DOD benefit. Nobody's going to take that from you. Like that's the DOD can take it from you, but no country is going to take that from you. So that in and of itself is just dumb that they say that. And then revoking your SOFA status, that's not something that a country can just do because this is an agreement between two nations. So all of that to say, Italy was just the worst. They terrified spouses. Like people just were afraid to get in trouble. They didn't want to say anything. So when the exchanging of letters happened this summer with Italy, it like I had Stars and Stripes and Military Times call me at the news broke at 12:30. At 12:37, I had two reporters call me and say, what do you think? And they couldn't print my first reaction because I just couldn't believe it. That the worst offender was the one that was like now setting the example. All of this to say, the exchanging of letters in Italy resulted in the most clear rules of engagement for status of forces agreements that I have seen. And what I have been suggesting to everyone I've talked to, I briefed all of the 4 stars in the military last Friday and suggested this to them as well. Take that level of clarity, take that to your installation leadership, your installation JAG, and demand that same type of clarity for wherever you're stationed. Take that, go as high up the chain as you can, because it needs to come from our combatant commanders in the State Department. They need to get together and talk about it. But our combatant commanders in these locations regularly talk to the State Department. So this is not like a weird ask. This is not, this isn't something that's impossible to figure out. And so maybe some of the answers in the Italian exchanging of letters, maybe some of the answers aren't ideal, but they're answers. And they're something for us to turn to and say, oh, okay, if I'm an attorney in Italy, this is what practicing law looks like, right? Because what's happened to all of us, in my experience, is it doesn't say anywhere that I can do this, so it must mean that I can't. What we should be doing is the reverse. It doesn't say I can't, so I can. But what we owe each other and what we owe the families behind us is the same kind of clarity that came out of the Italy agreement.
Thanks, Beth, for sharing a little bit. I think we talked about barriers in the poll, and one of the barriers that I know especially is huge in Germany, and I know we might have some representation there, is the taxation issues and how we, in various countries, so not just Germany, how we don't know necessarily if we are violating the SOFA, like to your point, Beth. Does anyone here want to share about that? How do you approach ensuring that you're not violating the SOFA, and or where do you turn to clarify that? Have you asked a JAG? Have you asked a personal attorney? What does that process of making sure you're adhering to the SOFA look like for you all? Or as I know someone who's thinking about going, what would that look like as you approach going to kind of get your ducks in a row? Is anyone willing to share about their experience there?
I'll share a little bit. I'm new here to Germany. We relocated from Japan, where I did work full time. Unfortunately, wasn't able to transfer, so I'm kind of starting all over again, as many of us have to do. But I think when it comes to finding something that's legal, trusted, less stress, I think I turn to federal employment, just because I feel that that's the safe route. But it is very difficult here. And, that's something that I've never actually been employed by the government. So trying to navigate that has been a whole new learning experience. And it's, not only very competitive, there's not a lot of jobs here. So I think that's one of my, I feel like that's the safe zone, but there's not enough work and there's not enough opportunities. So that really is why I'm here and passionate about, being here and everything that you, Jennifer and Beth, have done and are doing, because ultimately I think we need more opportunities. And I think this last poll question really, that just hit right on. So thank you for that. But yeah, that's my safety net. But I know there's so much out there. My experience is military serving nonprofits, so I would love to stay that route. But unfortunately, I've been being hit with those roadblocks, and some employers not feeling the safety and those concerns or challenges that were in that poll about the taxing and laws surrounding overseas employment.
Thank you for sharing. You're right. And there's a lot of layers too, especially if you're, like you mentioned, nonprofit work, if you're operating out of your home, either whether you're self-employed or you are, a nonprofit employee, which, often you might be sending out mailers or things like that. And then you're inadvertently violating some of the regulations on using APO and FPO mailboxes. So, has anyone encountered any barriers or any concerns that maybe weren't in this question that that came up during the process that, you think, I didn't know about that, or no one really talks about that until you figured it out for yourself? Is there anything we haven't kind of addressed that is a concern? Okay. If not, no big deal. I know that there were in the call last night, one of the concerns that someone shared was the ability to have office space. When you're looking at picking your location, housing is not always an option, and you might have to live on the installation based on your family dynamic. You have a certain number of bedrooms allocated, and obviously that can cause that cannot always work out exactly as one might want, but that was a concern. So that's an example. Tara, did you want to share something? I see it came off mute.
So I guess, for me, so I still work US hours, but live here. So I work 2 to 10 p.m. England time. So the family dynamics that creates, right? As my husband, right now he's gone for a whole month. So, then I have my daughter with me, and it just, creates stress all the way around. And then looking at, and my daughter's 3, sorry. So that kind of paints the picture a little better. And then, looking at, we discussed, do I just stay back in the States so that I can have a job? And is it worth that? This isn't a deployment, but is that what we need to do from, my own mental health, my way to have, kind of a path forward? The cost or the average pay rate here in the UK is significantly lower than what in the States, so it's to a point of, if I'm over here working just a straight UK job, before I joined Raytheon, is it even worth working? Because I'm working for dollars, like pennies compared to what my US salary is. And then, like our OHA covers, we have a 2-bedroom flat here, and without going outrageously above, OHA can't afford much bigger, right? So like, where do I work and how does that work? Because I'm working in the evenings, when my daughter's here. So those are all definitely dynamics. And I'd say on the previous question on SOFA stuff is, the SOFA hasn't been updated since 1951. So, right, like women couldn't even work, so much less talking about remote work. And so I tried to read it once and it goes way over my head because I'm not an attorney. I don't speak all those, formal words and stuff. So I just kind of hope, and I'm not breaking it. I hope I'm not breaking it, but who would I know?
It's really hard. And, you kind of touched on this, and I feel like we've kind of danced around this kind of conversation. Did you approach, do you feel as though sometimes there's an assumption that you won't work?
Oh yeah. Of all of us, so we're at a remote location here in England too. So there's about 30 US people, probably only about 12 spouses. And I'm the only one who works full time. Some of the other spouses are doing 1099 work still for their US company, but doing it through the 1099 approach. But yes, I think the assumption is that, cool, you get to live in England, you won't work and you'll just do whatever your husband needs.
Does anyone else have any experiences there? Has there been any, alternatively, has anyone kind of been like, do you want to keep working? Here's the solution. Like, has there been a pathway presented to anyone in the call, to kind of combat that mentality? Because I think that, what you shared, Tara, is something that people have shared before, right? This is something that has historically been true. It's difficult to work, so people maybe just don't, or there's those barriers, and you're like, people kind of assume or they decide to take a career break. Decide is in quotation marks. Have you had any experiences that would confirm or, contrasting to that, say, no, or here's how you can work? Anyone else want to share?
I think we're at a unique changing of the guard right now. Because 10 years ago, when I was devastated professionally that my career was immediately halted, I was told, "You're over, just enjoy the travel, honey." Like it was just this condescending, like, this is your time, enjoy it, without any, regard for what I needed to be fulfilled personally. But and sort of like I briefed at the 4-Star Forum, this generation, like the E5s, O4s, O5s, this generation of military family, the spouses need to work. We have to. Families cannot survive on the one income alone. And that is very much like a changing of the guard, right? So the DoD leadership that we have right now, yes, they've been hearing about spouse employment for 10 years. Absolutely. Like it's the same conversation. Unfortunately, it hasn't really changed. I will say this Italy thing is going to change things. I have a feeling. But their spouses didn't really work. And if they got stationed overseas, it didn't really matter, because that was 20 years ago when they were in the prime of their career. And it was a totally different time. And so the more that we get, our cohort of service members sort of falling into position, like, for example, my husband, when he was a battalion commander last year, I refused to go to any steering committee meeting, anything that was during the workday. Absolutely not. If there was a family day during the workday, I'm just not going to come. I don't care that you're the battalion commander. I have a job too, right? And I'm not going to ask you to take time off of your day to come to my company picnic, because one, we don't do that. But right, so I stand very firmly on that, regardless of what my husband's role is. And do I get side eye? Absolutely. Because I'm not decorating for the ball and I don't attend things. But there's the Army has to stop talking out of both sides of their mouth. They have to stop saying that this is a family business and spouse employment matters, and then do shit like require volunteer, free manual labor, and then hold meetings at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. So I think this group, all of us on this call, we are that kind of changing tide to say absolutely not. We both adults in the relationship can thrive professionally, and there will be a little bit of give and take, but it does not have to be all give and all take, right? So all of that to say, I think the tide is changing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we know there's we benefit from our relationships with our friends. This is a great benefit of this life, but it's not necessarily, it's a kind of a byproduct of the life is that we find friendships, and that's fabulous. And the byproduct of the life, OCONUS, is amazing opportunities for travel, but it doesn't necessarily, to your point, that sounds like that shouldn't have to cost the opportunity to continue to be employed. I like this question of solutions, because I think that military spouses, every time I've done individual interviews, I always hear a solution buried in the interview. So what are some solutions you think that would make your experience, either reflecting back or, if you were looking to move overseas, what would make this easier? If anyone wants to share their responses, if there's anything that wasn't included in this poll, what would make it easier for you? And what could we ask of leaders to make it more accessible? Anyone want to share?
I definitely, Jennifer, think back to, again, the poll that in the last one where it said, making employers more knowledgeable about being able to retain spouses, as they, move overseas. I think that's a huge thing. So if we can, keep raising awareness for employers to, understand, what, laws are in effect and how they can, still keep us and, keep us employed. I think that's a big one. And then also, I think just that same agreement that, just happened with Italy, starting to see changes in the other countries that struggle. So like Germany for one. And I know Japan had some challenges as well. So I think keeping up the work with that will be huge.
Thanks for sharing. Anyone have any other thoughts or, things that worked out that like you were kind of surprised about, like, hey, I was so glad and this person really helped me. This is the thing that they did that really made it more like helped me walk through the process. Because I think that there are best practices, there are installations, there are individuals who do see the importance of helping through this process. Or do you feel like you were the first person to ever, go into that office and ask that question? Sometimes that's what I hear. That's what I felt. My husband and I, we were stationed in Japan twice. And the first time he's like, every time I go to this office, it's like they've never experienced someone moving from San Diego to Atsugi, Japan ever in their life. And so it very much was interesting to hear that from his perspective as the active duty member, because that's how I feel every time I go to an office in certain instances. Others, it's like, that was great, and let's duplicate that. Has anyone kind of experienced anything where there was a good best practice? Kelly, I saw you on mute. Does that mean you have something to say?
I did, but then you asked a new question and I don't want to derail the thought. So if anybody wants to respond to that, I can come back.
No, we're here for a conversation to learn from each other. If anyone wants to respond in the chat or send an email, this is a conversation here.
Well, by way of, go ahead, please. No, go.
Oh, I was just going to share a couple. I wouldn't say best practices, but great resources I found here in Germany that really helped me, because I did feel like I was starting from, ground up. And, the other thing I'll say is that each branch is different. So, we're a Marine Corps family, we've come to an Army installation. So, having to learn the lingo and language, there were a number of different barriers I faced, but two resources that were very helpful for me were USO Transitions Program and Army Community Services. So I don't know, where everyone else is, but they really, really did help me, put some things in order and try to connect some pieces. So I definitely want to share those.
Do you think that the things that they were able to help with were replicatable in the sense that this is what they helped with, this would have been great if it happened at a different installation? Or is it something that is truly like stuck on that case by case, right? Because I think sometimes, you come in with your professional experience and let's say you have this niche job and maybe they don't understand, for example, healthcare. That might be very complex. There's different things that someone at ACS may not have that familiarity, but somebody over at the health, center would know, or whatever. Was it something you think could be replicatable in your experience?
Absolutely. And a lot of the information was pretty general. So not, specifically, tailored to one role, but kind of, as a resource and, pointing me in directions of, looking at different options and really, I guess, figuring out my community. So I think that was a really big help.
Awesome. Thanks. Tara, did you want to share something?
I'm not sure. So like I said, we're in a remote location. So we're at a NATO base. So we have no ACS, no any US support, right? There's a GO. But like I said, all the other wives don't work. So really kind of out on my own. The closest base is an Air Force base, has some US personnel 2 hours away. And so I'm wondering, and this may already exist that y'all know of, are all of those like ACS resources online or accessible? Is that Military One Source or some of that, or virtual options to meet with someone tied with ACS? I'm sure their funding is tied to an installation or something, but for those who aren't close to a big base too.
So this is where SOFA gets tricky. And this is kind of to Kelly's comment in the post and a little bit, Tara, of what you just asked. So there is no one at DoD tracking SOFA because the Status of Forces Agreement is owned by the State Department. Mm-hmm. So my hope is, I keep mentioning this brief on Friday, but when I was briefing these 4 stars on Friday, the question was asked to me, who at Patty Barron's office under Military, Family, Community, and Policy is tracking SOFA? And the answer was me, the civilian who works at AWS. Like, not an acceptable answer, right? Like I should not be the voice of DoD. That's like not, I'm fine doing it because I will burn down a building to solve this problem.
Clear. Beth does not work for the DoD. You said DWF. Beth has no connection other than being a passionate military spouse. She does not work for the DoD or anyone, right? Let's just clarify for the record.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my hope is that, once the Chief of Staff of the Army, General George, realized that like, I am just using my own blood, sweat, and tears to like push this along, he got pretty pissed, and he was like, well, this is not okay. We have an entire military family community policy office that should own this. So my hope is that, maybe they will. Maybe once you air your dirty laundry in public, people tend to act, right? So now maybe
might be hiring.
That. Maybe it might be a slow roll. All of that to say, you can look on Military OneSource. There is information about the new updates in Italy. There is very generic, like boilerplate, what a SOFA is on Military OneSource. You should, though, be able to always contact your installation JAG. But again, talk about taxes, not
Taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Beth, you mentioned that there is no one currently assigned this function, essentially going and being an advocate on behalf of these policies on the DoD side. Have you gotten any guidance since that kind of was brought up of like, are we, kind of, who do we go to? Like, where do we go? Where do people go who are on this call, or other people? What did they say to you? Like, where should people be headed if they have a problem and they can't handle it at the installation?
There's two sort of avenues that you can take. One, and this is where you're going to be the most effective, in particular, if you are living in that country. One, you locally go to your local JAG and up as high as that chain of command as you can go. Take that Italy agreement to them and say, we need this kind of clarity. What do we need to do? Right? So that's one. The other one is because there's really nobody assigned to SOFA, there is an action officer that is tracking the executive order that President Biden signed on June 9th this summer. I'll drop it in the chat in 1 second. That executive order is it's broad sweeping. I mean, it's got like 27 bullets of like, caregivers and education and childcare reimbursement and like one line on SOFA. So there is an action officer who is kind of tracking that executive order. And then there is also Eddie Menser. He works for Patty Barron's office, but he's not the owner, right? Like I reached out to their office and said, hey, I'm doing a workshop for the Small Business Administration. I'm doing a couple of webinars. Can someone from DoD either give me talking points or come with me? And I literally got a no answer, like not just no, or not that we don't, I got like a non-response. So I also think that people don't realize that there's no one at DoD covering this. So I think the more that we sort of like beat that drum to be like, are you kidding me? No one's tracking this? Because again, DoD's position is, well, the State Department owns it. I don't care who owns it. This is directly impacting military families. So DoD has skin in the game. DoD needs to have somebody tracking this. So all of that to say, locally, you can raise your voice and make some change there. Or you can reach out to Eddie Menser and hopefully get a better response.
And like I said before, all of this information, like some of these links and some of these references, we'll get in a post to share. I have no more formal like poll questions, but want to better understand how people's experiences might be different than what we've already shared. If there's anything that we didn't get to talk about, positive or negative, about the SOFA and or living overseas, that the military is going to keep sending our service members overseas and possibly continue sending families with them. Obviously, the barriers people have shared, sometimes the response is, well, if this is so hard, then just don't come, or, if there's a medical problem, a lack of medical care on an installation, though their folks have shared their concern is like, if I say something, then I'll be sent home, and so I think the goal in this conversation is to understand how to address these barriers and workable solutions so that people can continue to live with their family. And, that would feed positively into that retention conversation. So is there anything that we didn't get to touch on? Anything you all want to share, or any questions for Beth, who has, this wealth of experience and knowledge of the SOFA? Feel free to come off mute and just share at this point, or I can give you back like 8 minutes of your day.
I say like it definitely, as we've addressed, has to start from the top down, but like for all leaders to be able to have that understanding of what's possible, so my husband is an 03 and his 06 has told him, well, then you can leave this summer. If it's too hard for your wife to work here and to figure this out, then you can leave. And so, it's like career trajectory and like where that falls. Okay, is it my fault because I want to work, and so it just like plays in a lot more. It's like definitely starts at the top. But like for all leaders to be able to have this understanding of, what's allowed, what's capable. And I think, like you said, Beth, like it starts with that clarity, like the Italy agreement, like this is possible, this can be done, in simple language too.
And
But
Tara,
Tara,
the
like
fact that
the
you had
only
to say, like, is this my fault because I wanted to work? That just made my stomach hurt because that's bullshit. That's the same conversation I had with my husband. I was like, either you leave me or we leave the army. Like, and you shouldn't have to have that conversation. But military spouse unemployment continues to be the top 3 reasons service members leave. And being overseas drastically impacts our ability to maintain employment. So that's really frustrating that your husband's leadership, that was their answer. Oh, you can leave. Like you're missing the point.
I just want to add to that. And the only way things are going to change with leaders in the military who see our work as valuable. Also, it's going to take us convincing them to leave and us not being in situations where they're having to choose. Right. So it's like this, if we could just break through, like if we could just like, I think it's like, Beth, you said it, like it's up to us to kind of like gut it out, make it work, pave the path so that then like our spouses who are serving can support their careers, our careers all at the same time, and then thus be able to support those underneath them that come up behind. It's just, so far we haven't seen that, right? Because just like you said, we're still dealing with that.
Yeah, but this is solvable. This really is like Jen said, like a lot of people are like, well, SOFA's just really hard, so like let's not make any waves. Screw that. Let me make some fucking waves. Let's fix this. Like this is solvable. Just because it's hard doesn't mean that we should like, well, it's hard, right? Like, and the more that we can remove these barriers for ourselves now, then the easier it will be for families behind us to serve and to both thrive professionally. Because bureaucracy moves slow, but it doesn't need to move that slow.
Yeah. Liz, did you want to share?
I just wanted to say that it's so interesting because there's all these other threads and trains running out about, the food insecurity study and mental health and suicides. And obviously this plays a role, and it's just so interesting that it's just not being tracked because this single issue could retention, all these main buzzwords that seem to get a lot of attention these days. This would be such a positive step for all of those issues. And just the idea that it has gone under the radar for so long is just nuts.
It is. And so that's the purpose of these conversations, is not to, I'll say this, you should not have to start a nonprofit to fix a problem. To have your voice heard enough to make, and these nonprofits, this is not a knock. They are absolutely essential to getting stuff done, to putting literal food on people's tables. They're absolutely essential, but to share concerns, we shouldn't have to funnel those concerns through a nonprofit that would get the attention of the senior leaders to make positive change. And so that's the purpose of these conversations. And, in the registration, I asked, what other things would you like to hear about? What would you like to talk about? This is one of those things that I think it gets less attention, but it has very big impact. And so that's the things that we're going to talk about in these future conversations, because I hope to have, one a month or one every other month, depending on the topics that come up. But it's to be able to respond to emerging issues, because nonprofits are doing their thing over there. They cannot necessarily pivot to go help over here. And the DoD definitely can't pivot really fast into fixing some of these problems, but we can work together to kind of understand them a little bit more. If anyone is okay with it, I did also ask in the poll, in the registration, if you're willing to share with me or more about your story, I might reach out to just get a little bit more information, because this is just a brief conversation designed to connect you with somebody who can answer some questions, but also hear from you all so we can share some solutions as well. Does anyone have anything else to share, or have any questions, or have any suggestions of topics to cover in the future? I'm here for, obviously the next 3 minutes, but also after this call is officially over, and would be happy to answer any questions or chat more.
I first want to say thank you again to the both of you for taking the time to do this and, let our voices be heard. Because that is one thing is, feeling like, you can't make noise or, no one's going to listen. So thank you for creating this platform for us to be able to do so. And I look forward to the future conversations that you will plan. And then the other thing I just wanted to ask, in terms of other things that we could use, or at least myself personally, I'd love more information on like fellowships. I know Amazon is here in Germany, and I've been trying. That's one of them I've been trying to kind of figure out, but more information on actual fellowships for spouses of CONUS, and the other thing is, finding that, a lot of the federal jobs require security clearances, opportunities where we as spouses may be able to acquire a security clearance. So I know of one so far here where, we have to be an unpaid intern, I believe. So any other information or resources on that would be phenomenal.
I would say why fellowships and why not just direct hire? Because the fellowship pay is kind of comical. Like it's there to check a box, but it's not really pay. So why not direct hire? We hire out of Germany all the time.
Yeah, and there's also like there are policies that I've written about before that are actually not just, they look to the states to hire people. They have like, you can name a person you want to hire from the states, and it actually bypasses the military spouse preference in order when that happens. They post the job for like 3 days or 5 days, which is, I think the 5 days is the minimum that they can post. But basically it's all just for formality, and they kind of have processes that skirt hiring military spouses. I don't know about if you're able to, and I know we only have 1 minute. Do you know if the executive order addressed that? I know they addressed federal hiring. It was mentioned, but I don't know that it went into that.
It was a vaguity over federal hiring. There wasn't a specific directive around that.
So I think that some of the things you're just mentioning, Maria, looking into those practices where it's, let's do the minimum posting for 5 days, but we actually have invited this person from the states to move and paying for them to move. That those types of practices need to be examined, I think, a little bit more. I personally am curious as to how they're legal, posting just that formal because they have to, because it's a mandate, is kind of it's skirting the heart of the law, so to speak. And what they're trying to, we need to get better at seeing this community as valuable employees. Liz, did you want to share anything before we?
I was just going to say, as a planner, I was just perusing, USA jobs, and one of the requirements in the questionnaire was, do you already reside there? It's like, no, but I want to get ahead of this. And so the idea that you would have to be in country before you could even find an employment is just, just a situation that doesn't seem great, because by the time you do get employed, you're probably maybe 4 months in, and then you only have about 1.5 years or so left at this assignment. And so it just doesn't seem practical to not allow individuals to plan ahead in that way.
Especially because the hiring process is so lengthy that you would think that there would be like a track where you could say, I am moving, and I know orders can be canceled, but if it's not as though they narrow that part down to like 1 person or 2 people, usually there's probably a few in that
so they
pool.
weed you out in the screening process. So even if you are like, oh, I'm going to be there soon, if you just answer no, I'm not in country, you're done. But that's just a whole part of the federal hiring process.
Or you have like the report date. Like it would make sense maybe to have like, okay, maybe I'm not there yet, but this is the anticipated report date. And if the report date is beyond a certain number of days, then maybe that's a fair, thing to do, is to, because anything could happen and they have, needs, but at least like looking at that, even adding, what is your report date? That could make it open a door for more people. That's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have anything else to share? And if not, it was lovely talking with you all. And as I mentioned in the top of the call, the purpose, I will be using this information to inform the articles that I write, and hopefully others will see it too, and create a resource on my Substack, which I'll share with you. You don't need to pay for anything to see that. But feel free to share it with others in your community. We'll include the links that Beth shared and some of those tips and tricks that she had. Anyone else have anything to share before we hop off? Alrighty.
Thanks, everyone.
everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.